David, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well. Thank you. Can you hear me, Jennifer?
Can hear you great.
Excellent.
Okay, I think it's time. Let's go ahead and jump in. We want to be respectful of everyone's time here today. Um, so for those of you that are new to our Limitless, we are helping clients save, invest for their futures. We're building generational wealth, and most importantly, we're bringing peace of mind. We're also bringing confidence so that way you can retire and know that you've planned well. Our Limitless program is our Women in Investing program here at Frontier. It's exactly what it says. We are focusing on women, wealth, and wellness. Our goal is to empower more women. And many men that are joining us today, included David, that's going to be talking with me. But we're really striving to empower women and give them the wealth management tools and knowledge that they need to help us live their best life with purpose and confidence. And just a couple housekeeping things before I turn it over to David and allow him to introduce himself, and then we'll get started. This presentation is going to be recorded. If you need to hop off early, we understand, but hope that you'll stay to the end. We'll be able to send this out to everyone that is on the call, and then this will also be in our monthly newsletter for Limitless. A couple of you have submitted questions prior to this webinar today. We're going to address those. If you have questions that come up as we're meeting, you can always respond to the Limitless email address that the invite came from, or you can chat with your advisor about some of the things that this discussion sparks. So thank you so much. David, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself, and then I'm excited to get started.
Great, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'd also like to thank Frontier and the whole Limitless team for inviting me to participate this morning. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm presently the head of the estate and financial planning team at Hightower, which is a partner firm to Frontier Investments. Before that, I actually worked at a very large private banking institution where I worked in the trust and estate planning area. And prior to that was an attorney specializing in trust and estate planning and tax exempt organizations. So I have a kind of a soft spot for charitable giving, if you will. I also have two adult daughters. One is a doctor who has two daughters. So the things that we're going to talk about today, believe it, two granddaughters. The things we're going to talk about today are obviously very important, but also very personally important to me. So just a little bit about me.
I love it. I'm so excited for the audience to hear some of these stories. I know I've heard a couple, and being a mom to a little one, an only daughter, it just makes you look at things so differently. Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Thank you all so much for being patient with us during our technology experience. We also have Ami Doshi on the line with us. If you see another member of our team in the background, she is helping us make sure that everything looks great for everyone here today.
All right.
Okay, David.
Yeah, let's jump into our conversation this morning. So you might be wondering, gosh, we're here to talk about financial empowerment. So why are we looking at a blind spot monitoring system? So interestingly enough, we all know the car brand Volvo, and I think it has a very strong reputation for being a very safe car brand. So interestingly enough, back in 2003, there was a lot of research coming out showing that a lot of dangers, like we all know this, but dangers and accidents and things arising from blind spots in cars or when you're in traffic. So the engineers at Volvo set about creating what we now know today as the blind spot monitoring system. It's that little blinking light in the corner of your side mirrors. And the reason why they did that, they wanted to provide drivers with enough notice so that if there were any dangers coming along the side, there's a little warning blinking. So what we want you to do this morning is kind of think about Jennifer and I and the Limitless team here as kind of that blind spot monitoring system. And we're going to go over a few blind spots. There are 5, but there are many more. But just think about it as that. And really what we want to do is make you aware of these issues or these concerns so that you have plenty of time to think about, respond, and react to them. And then just an ask, I do teach a class in financial literacy over at TCU in Fort Worth. And so I have a tendency sometimes to slip into professor mode, and I'm going to go right now, and I'm going to ask everybody, if you aren't already taking notes, if you could get out that piece of paper and a pen, or however you do your note taking. I can tell you at the collegiate level, it's all on a laptop. If you could just get that out, because I think we're going to talk about some things, and you may want to jot some notes down.
Great. Okay. Can you see the next slide?
Yes, we are good.
Okay, great. David, thank you so much. So today, just to set things up for us, 5 topics that we are going to talk about in reference to the blind spots that David just mentioned. 1, confidence level with financial matters and decision making. I think that this is one of the most important. Women and longevity risk, career breaks, estate planning and legal preparedness, and then last, pay and investment gaps. I'm going to hop into confidence with financial matters, decision making. I think about this, and David, personally, I know you have 2 daughters. You have done, and I know you're going to share some stories about how you've always tried to educate them. Not all of us grew up in a family like that. I started in this business 24 years ago, and I'm so grateful for that, because growing up, money was kind of taboo. Money, there was a lot of stress around it. There was a lot of weight, sometimes a burden that came when talking about money. And so not only do you not feel comfortable talking about it, but how do you even ask someone for help in making, financial decisions or understanding that? And I think that a lot of women that I chat with today, if they're just starting their careers, or if they're more mature and sophisticated women, they've experienced that same thing. So if there's, a divorce, if there's a death, if there is a financial emergency, you're used to kind of taking care of the purse strings or writing the checks, balancing the checkbook, but you are not always empowered to come in and make some of those financial decisions. So how do we change that mindset of delegating, someone else can do it, they've always had it, to now we feel confident and we feel empowered to have a seat at the table?
Yeah, and it's interesting, Jennifer, because for those folks that are in relationships or married, sometimes you just kind of get into your role, if you will, or get into your lane, and then so one spouse goes down the path of certain things, the other one, the other things, and historically, maybe traditionally, taking into account things like taboos and not really talking about these things as we grow up. If it's landing in the the lap of the male in the relationship, then kind of like what we just saw on the screen, there is risk, right? Because like you just talked about, if there's a divorce or a death. I mean, I was recently working on a case, and the husband had gone into an incapacity or declining health situation. And so the advisor and myself, we were talking with the spouse, and her eyes, as we were going through things, I could just see and I could feel how overwhelmed she was. Thankfully, we were talking about it before anything has happened yet. But yeah, there's certainly it's confidence, and we put that in quotes because I think it's a nuanced point. But I think that gets to the heart of it. But I know there are some statistics that support exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and and I know that David, from our side, we see both things. I think confidence in financial decision making means different things to different people, though.
Absolutely.
And to your point, you know, when you're going through a crisis, you aren't feeling confident about anything. It is a triage. How do we just manage, emotions? How do we manage, the situation that's going on? So I really think that, this is a great place that we started here. Um,
Yeah, and I'll just say, you mentioned divorce, and I hope nobody ever has to go through that. But I've worked with many clients on both sides, and one of the things that I've observed through many meetings is, again, these are generalities, so there's always exceptions, but there's a lot of times the female in the relationship was not aware of all of the assets, right? And then what happens? Lawyers are going back and forth, and legal fees keep mounting while they're trying to sort all this out. And if both spouses, both partners in a relationship know what's going on, just alleviate some of that risk.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. I know we do have a certain period of time here, so you and I are going to have to keep each other in check on our storytelling. But on the other side of that, I work with a lot of women in transition and widows, and again,
Yeah.
left in the dark about what they had financially, and so their spouse passes away, and then they have millions of dollars. And then there's a stress or a burden of, well, now what do I do this? And that is a gift, it's a blessing. But sometimes if we don't know how to navigate that, or if we don't feel confident in what we do with it, it still becomes a burden.
Yeah, and I think that's why even like what you have done with and Frontier have done with Limitless and creating these communities, it's so important. I did put on here a little bullet point just about talking with your daughters early and often about money and investing. The reason why I put that on there is just a quick story on that. One of the things that just knowing that this is a thing, just being in this business for so long, I wanted to make sure that I was giving my daughters the opportunity to start to learn about these things and kind of demystify it, right? Take the taboo out of it. So when we'd be on vacations, Jennifer, I would to like a one-page slide on something financial planning related, and we would discuss it for just it's vacation, so dad's not going to beat everyone down, but we'd take a little bit of time to talk about those things. And I do remember just sharing one slide one time. It was about the accounting benefits of investing. I just remember both of their little eyes, lighting up when they saw the big number if they started investing earlier in life. So, and just about communication and bringing these things to light and talking about it.
Yeah, I know everything is online now, but when we started in this business, we had the slide ruler. Do you remember that? When you pulled it out, the money went up and you can see, what percentage you were contributing. Um, that is what we need to bring back for this young generation. So, um, perfect. Anything else on confidence? I know that, Limitless, we've created these communities of women, and it really is designed to educate our clients on, these blind spots, these certain topics. Um, Anything else that you would add before we take a look at the next blind spot?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a thread through all of it, which is for clients, for people out there, to have an advisor like you, Jennifer, that's aware of these issues and then can actually put like practical suggestions and recommendations together. So that would just be just a practical thing I would say as it relates to this.
you. Okay. Longevity list, longevity risk. It is no surprise that women live longer than men. My husband will say that that's because we are more stubborn, and maybe that is the case. But that is something that we really have to look at, because when we plan, we may not be planning to the same, and not only the same number of years, but it's also the condition. So we may spend a longer period of time with memory care. We may spend a longer time, needing assistance. And so since we do live longer, we've got to start planning, and we have to do it as early as possible. So just some numbers to that. On average, women live to 81, men live to 76. Not only are we having to plan, for savings because of the longevity, but if we think about healthcare cost as well, David, that was one of the things that, I know you wanted to bring up. Healthcare costs are not going down. When we're going through financial planning for clients and we're talking about, as we call the slow go or the no-go years, when we get to that point in our lives, we may not be spending on new homes and vacations and cars, but we are spending so much more on healthcare.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as healthcare continues to progress and we have more advancements in healthcare, that only prolongs our life expectancy. So even though, today we're sitting here and we're saying 81 and 76, maybe 20 years ago it was 71 and 66. Who knows what it's going to be 10, 15 years from now. So to your point, Jennifer, we live longer, and cost, even if there's a shift, not houses and cars, but it's other things like healthcare expenses. Certainly, we have to be aware.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the type of healthcare too. That's one of the things when we're going through planning with clients, and we're talking about long-term care policies. Do you want to age in place? Do you want to just be comfortable? Do you want to live your last years in something that feels like a Ritz-Carlton? What is it, and how do we accommodate that? I think that anytime we're going through financial planning, this is the risk of the unknown. None of us get to say, we get to take our last breath at age 80 and a half.
Yeah.
That is decided, for us. So that's not something that we get a choice in. And that's really, I think, one of the most unknown things that we are trying to plan for, because you're healthy, cognitive, physically, emotionally, mentally, you're with it, things are going great. And then we have this life altering course.
Yeah.
And if we've not prepared financially and we don't have other things in place, that's where we can really get into some trouble.
Yeah, I bet, Jennifer, if we were live with the audience and we asked everyone to just show of hands who's been impacted by an unexpected healthcare event or death in the family, I bet you most people, if not everybody, would raise their hand. So to your point, it's just being prepared. One of the things that I did want to do was just share some practical pointers on some numbers. And so for those of you that are taking notes, I'm going to go through a little bit of Professor Dave here, and I want you to write down these 5 numbers, okay? Because these are critically important numbers. So here they are: 80, 40, 20 plus, 2 to 1, and 15. Okay, so 80, 40, 20, 2 to 1, and 15. And let me explain to you why we're talking about this here with the longevity risk. So we've just literally been talking about how we're going to live longer and we need more resources. So the 80, if you're thinking, what's a rule of thumb to just be prepared? You've got to be able to replace at least 80% of your pre-retirement salary. So 80% is a number. 40, A lot of people think that we see it in research that Social Security is going to cover the lion's share of retirement. Well, what the reality is 40% of retirement income is essentially can be covered by Social Security. And if you're a very fortunate person and you live a very nice lifestyle, Social Security will be a much lower percentage than 40%, than 20 or 20 plus. We just talked about it. You're going to live in this kind of like retirement in quote period for 20 or more years. So you got to be prepared to have resources for that long. 2 to 1. I'll give you a little history lesson, Jennifer. So the concept of retirement, it came about in the late 1800s under, at the time, the leader in Germany was Otto von Bismarck. And he created this concept called retirement. So basically what's happening, people would start working at age 20, they'd work 50 years, and so then they would have retirement. Expectancy back then was about 2 years. In other words, people had 50 years of work to save for 2 years of retirement. Well, let's think about our modern world. We work from, say, 25 to 65, so 40 years, and we're saying we're going to be in this retirement mode for at least 20. So that's 40 over 20. So in other words, for every 2 years we're working, we're trying to save for 1 year of retirement. Wow, that honestly, that kind of gives me chills. And then the last one, 15. Ask yourself, everyone that's listening this morning, am I saving enough money for retirement? However you answer that, the 15, a recommendation, again, general rule of thumb, 15% of your, you should be contributing towards savings and investing on an annual basis. So 80, 40, 20, 2 to 1, and 15. 5 super important numbers, Jennifer, on the longevity front.
I've got it. I'm gonna start using those. It's interesting you talk about that, and we talk about, are we saving enough? And we sit with so many clients in their entire lives, all they've done is work and save and work and save. And then you get to retirement. And this is some longevity risk, some just what we see, but you get to retirement and it's a mindset switch.
Oh, yes.
How do you go from saving and working, saving, to retirement and spending those savings? So sometimes we'll have clients that are still, when they retire, we start going through their spending. They still have that. It's not 15%, but they still have that little nest egg that they're trying to save. And sometimes they're having to say, no, 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 no. We're having to pay tax on that that's coming out. Let's leave this in other buckets. But the behaviors don't change. And so going back to what we talked about at the very beginning, if you have daughters, if you have women in your life, if you are a young woman on this call today, now is the time. Now is the time to start those behaviors, because when you retire, you don't all of a sudden just stop spending less.
Yeah, there's so much of a emotional and just kind of mindset to all of this, Jennifer. So I really appreciate that you bring that up. It's interesting because I teach, an age demographic, let's say 20 or 21. I always tell them, I'm like, you have an advantage on Warren Buffett. And they're like, what is that? Like, what could I possibly have on Warren Buffett? And I say this, it's a 4-letter word, time.
Yes.
And then I put them a little chart and I show them, hey, if you start investing between now and age 26 and stop investing, you will actually have more money at age 65 than a woman that starts investing at 27 and does it for the next 40 years. So I always try to communicate that point that you just made, which is time is on your side, especially if you're young.
Yes, and time in the market is always better than timing the market. And hopefully we are not eating KFC, Pizza Hut, and drinking Cokes every day like Warren Buffett is as well. But hey, he is eating his own cooking per se, so I get that.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay. Time check. I think we're doing okay, David. We're gonna hop into potential career breaks. And I don't even want to say potential. Maybe we should have just taken potential out of that. Because if you're a woman, if you have kids and you don't have kids, we're not talking about, taking a break in your career just to raise children. We're talking about possibly caring for, an ill spouse. We're talking about caring for elderly parents. What does that look like for your impact on savings, portfolio growth? Any sort of career break reduces the amount that's coming in and reduces that 15% savings David just talked about. So, we kind of marry these two blind spots together, longevity and career breaks, and it's almost a double whammy at once. Because if we look at, some of the studies and the statistics, women will spend on average 7 to 14 years out of the workforce.
Yeah.
And, and we think about this, I think when my parents had kids, they were doing that in their 20s. I had my daughter when I was in my 40s.
Wow.
This was not oh, I stopped working, but I think that so many families, they're coming to the table because childcare is so expensive, early on, and they're saying, hey, what is the risk reward? What kind of family dynamic do we want to have? What type of environment do we want to provide? And one of the things that we have talked about in this is a spousal IRA. And I love that, that was something that we put on here, because even if we're out of the workforce, it doesn't mean that, we shouldn't still be saving.
Yeah, I think, yeah, for those on the line that maybe don't know exactly what a spousal IRA is, it's basically functionally it operates just like an IRA. But what it does is, especially if you're, going through a period of, that 7 to 14 years for whatever reason, it allows for a working spouse to still contribute to an IRA for I'll just call it the non-working spouse. And so if you think about it, you can, if you're less than 50, you can contribute up to $7,000. And so if you take advantage of a spousal IRA during a period like this, you're doubling your savings from 7 to 14,000. And look, we've got a little catch-up contribution. So Jennifer, anybody's over 50, you get an extra $1,000. So you can go from 8,000 or 7,000 to 8,000. But kind of to your point, what you made it when it comes to investing, if you're not adding to your portfolio for a period, in the long run, it does impact the overall results. So at least the spousal IRA is a way to keep going in a manner.
Yeah, and you talked about age 50 and the catch up. This chart that we just looked at, um, elderly parent care typically falls between your 40s and 60s, and that is typically 3 to 5 years. And that makes sense, right? Most long-term care events, I think, are 2.7 years. So, if you are, juggling that, when you're between 40 and 60, sometimes you're taking time off work,
Yeah.
and sometimes what's happening is you are doing it all. So we those that are in that spot right now, we see you, we hear you, we understand that, these are all of the invisible responsibilities that women have in taking care of their families. And so we have our personal home that we're taking care of, and we have our jobs. And if we don't have the ability to go part-time or retire fully, we're adding on all of those hours. And a lot of what we talk about in Limitless with, women, wealth, and wellness, that wellness component, there is a toll that it takes on you, not only financially, but also physically and emotionally when you are a caregiver.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I just know I've got brothers and two sisters, and we have an elderly mom. And, my two sisters, they carry a lot of that weight. And so, it's what you're saying there is very true. I did want to make a real quick point on the emergency fund. A lot of times if you Google emergency fund, it might say 3 to 6 months. I say 9 to 12 months. And the reason is I did some research, and when people are between jobs or maybe they unexpectedly lose a job, it takes on average at least 9 months to get a new job. So that became my new barometer of at least 9 months. And then this is a scary statistic. Most Americans don't even have like $500 in an emergency fund to cover things. So um, just we got to be prepared for those unexpected expenses. So just want to make a quick plug on that, the emergency fund.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Oh, you're gonna have fun. Estate planning and legal preparedness. We see this every day. David, this is how I got into the business. My biological mom passed away suddenly when I was 19. No will, no estate planning. I thought I was going to go off and be, the next Jerry Maguire and be a sports agent. And it was, going to be a wonderful time. And I got a front row seat to what not having a financial plan and an estate plan looked like.
Yeah.
And so, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just want to make sure that, we explain to the listeners what's included in an estate plan. You see it on there under the risk section. So at a minimum, there are legal documents that everyone should have, starting with at a minimum, a will. So that's a document, when you pass away, it gives the instructions for how to transition wealth. Powers of attorney. We're talking about people passing away, but incapacity it's higher probability in many regards. So you want to be able to make sure that if an incapacity event occurs, that a person is appointed to make financial and healthcare decisions. Because what we don't want to do, you mentioned intestacy, what you don't want to have happen is turn your estate plan over to whatever state law that you live in, and then let the state essentially determine how the assets are going to pass. So that's a legal process that costs money, but then also your goals and intent may not get carried out if it doesn't line up exactly with some state statutes about intestacy. So just some of the risk there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably add a couple of more to that as well. Your medical directives. So not only your medical power of attorneys, but medical directives, so that way your loved ones are not having to guess what decisions you'd like to be made. And then HIPAA. That was something that I think we never really thought about until the pandemic. And unfortunately, when we start going, or when people started calling on their loved ones, hey, my mom's in the hospital, can I get information? Oh, sorry, you can't, because we don't know who you are.
Yeah, it's interesting because we obviously want to protect people's private medical information, but which is fine until somebody needs to know that information to make a decision because they can't do it. So I love the fact that you called out that HIPAA authorization as well. So
And then last, before we hop into some of the statistics, for those of you that have kiddos that are now young adults and they've just graduated and they're about to go off and venture into their college days, or whatever they are doing in life, remember when they turn 18, they are a legal adult. That means you probably need to go ahead and have that medical power of attorney, that durable power of attorney for them as well, because you no longer get to make financial or medical decisions for them. In our world, when we're meeting with clients, we call that the college planning package. But that's really important to consider as well. For those of you that still have paper and pen out, I would love for you to think about what percentage of Americans do you believe have an estate plan? I do my little dun dun dun
yeah,
dun.
exactly.
Okay. This wasn't shocking to me, but it was sad. So 60% of Americans do not have any sort of estate plan. And I kind of think about this like ignorance is bliss, right? These are things that we don't want to sometimes address. These are really hard conversations. These are things when we start working with our clients and we're talking about financial planning and retirement and how they're going to spend out, the last 25, 30 years of their lives. That's fun. This is not. This is the hard stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you from experience, this is the most important thing that you can do for your loved ones, not only while you're living with some of the medical power of attorneys, durable power of attorneys that you talked about, David, but having a plan in place for when you pass. And I do want to just address one thing here when we get to what to do. We did have a question from the audience come in. It was talking about when your spouse passes, what happens with your IRA. So if you are on this call today with us, and we are so sorry for your loss and what you are going through, but just some of the logistics around that. So as long as a beneficiary is on that IRA of your spouse, and that is you, you can provide that death certificate to your Frontier advisor, and they'll be able to walk through getting that account re-registered, retitled in your name, and then walk through any distributions that need to happen ongoing. It's really important for spouses today when we talk about, kind of estate planning, that is set up in a spousal IRA. Because David, now that the Secure Act is in place,
Yeah.
if it's not, they could be required to take that out within 10 years of receiving that. And we know that we live to at least 81 women, so a lot of us would be able to stretch that out a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're just making a really great point about just beneficiary designations in general across all beneficiary type assets. And I can't tell you how often, Jennifer, I see because one of the things I do in my day-to-day work is review estate plans. Um, but part of that is reviewing beneficiary designations. And more often than I would like to see, they're either out of date or don't reflect current goals, or somebody has passed away. So just making sure that on a regular basis you review that with your advisor, just a good best practice.
Yeah, David, we have had heartache and heartbreak that we have seen with wrong beneficiaries being on IRAs and even, brokerage accounts and other accounts. And, oh, I updated my will, I updated my trust, I did all these things. Okay, great. That's step one.
Yes.
Step two is the implementation of that across your entire net worth. And that is where, Frontier as financial advisors, we're coming in and we're helping with those things. Doing beneficiary checks every year, making sure that, actually what we see in documents, again, is what we see on those beneficiary accounts.
Yeah, it's interesting because you like the statistics show 60% haven't done an estate plan, but even for the 40% that have done it, I would just encourage you. So if you're listening right now, like literally ask yourself, do you know what your estate plan says? Like, do you know how it works? Right? Because what Jennifer just made a really great point. Implementation is critical because you can have the best plan in the world, but if it doesn't get implemented correctly, well, then what good was it? So, do you know what it said? Another question maybe to ask yourself, when was the last time you updated it? If you pull it off the shelf and you dust it, that probably tells you right away. But if it's been a few years, I would suggest get that reviewed. And if it's all right, Jennifer, just to let the audience know, that's actually something that I do as an extension of working with, your team at Frontier, is we can review these things. So we don't want our audience to feel like they have the burden of it. We can actually support you in that. Uh, just some other things. Just think about like how have your circumstances changed, or what maybe your goals have changed. Maybe your adult children have changed. Like maybe when they were 20, you didn't think they were that responsible, but now they're 30 and they're just like these model citizens that know how to save and invest. And maybe you want to change the estate plan. So just some questions to spur your thought as you think about your estate plan.
Yeah, yeah, David, absolutely. We see that, and then we see the opposite of, hey, we may need to protect this person from themselves. How do we do that?
Yeah.
So, I think that one of the gifts that we have in our roles is we get to step into some of the most intimate spaces for our clients, just family dynamics and money. And believe me, we all have them. So anytime we are looking at things, we just want to make sure that
Yeah.
your wishes are being carried through. And one of the things you put in here is consider a letter of wishes. I started working with a client about 4 years ago, and in our first meeting, he brought a 3-page letter, and it was family values. It was what was really important. This man cried while he read this letter to me, and I cried while I was reading it. I went home and I feel like I rethought every decision that I've made in my life the last 40 something years. It was that impactful. And so we think about money, and we think about beneficiaries, and we think about that being a little bit more transactional, right? So, you know, I have $1 million, this $1 million goes here. But you don't think about some of the values, the stories, the memories, the things that actually matter in life.
Exactly. That's why we put it in here, right, Jennifer? It's like we're talking about real life for people. And look, what a letter of wishes is, just so everybody on the line again understands, it is not a legally binding document in the same way that a will is. But what it does is just what you said, like for that client of yours, it gives you the ability to share with the people that are going to receive the benefit of this, or trustees, by the way, that are going to be carrying out your trust. What was important to you? What are your values? What is important to you? Because I'll just share with the audience, like what's going to be written on the page is the trustee has the discretion to distribute income and principal, health, maintenance, and support. Well, what a letter of wishes will do is help the trustee, the person that's carrying that out, actually know what was important to you for the benefit of your adult children and grandchildren. And so, letter of wishes is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Okay, pay and investment gaps.
I think we're on number 5, right, Jennifer?
This
Of our
is
5.
five. This is five. It can't end. We're having too much fun. So when we think about some of the blind spots with pay and investment gaps, just to be very open, when we were initially going through this, David and I said, well, do we talk about pay gaps? We said, yes, that this is, this is not personal. These are statistics, these are numbers, and they're really important numbers. And when we start thinking about what we talked about with longevity, women being out of the workforce, you have time out of the workforce where you could be earning less. And then you also have the pay gap where, women may be earning less than men. Um, and to that, and David, I know you're going to talk about this some, the investment gap. And that comes with some of that confidence and how much risk do women feel comfortable taking compared to our male counterparts. If we take a look back to the 60s, we know that, the equity market that's the most volatile and where we take the most risk has averaged, over 8.5%. If we look at something more secure, more stable in the fixed income space, over that period of time, average returns are about 3%. And so if we just think about, where we feel more comfortable, I think it's something that we have to talk about and we have to address. Um,
Yeah, I think when we look at those statistics, you can see how that pay gap occurs at different levels, at different stages in life. But I love what you're saying, Jennifer, about like literally like how all of these quote unquote blind spots actually impact each other. And so that's why, we kind of got to get that big picture around it. But, certainly we can see this chart explaining some numbers behind it.
Yeah, and what I thought was so interesting is, um, you know, as women age, the pay relative to men, it actually decreases, and that has not changed in 40 years. It's not changed in the last 4 decades.
Yep. But what has changed is all people are living longer, including women. So
That's right.
that the need just has become that much more important to make sure that you're covering all these bases.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay. And then taking a look at, how women invest. So if we just look at investor behavior, kind of what we were talking about earlier, women do tend to invest more conservatively. And I think that's because, and believe me, risk means something different to every person that we sit in front of.
For sure.
If you're a man or if you're a woman, whatever situation, that you are in. Um, but I know you have a little bit of color around this just from some of what you see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's interesting because I part of the reason I teach that class is I always want to have like my finger on the pulse of the younger generation. And so just so everybody on the line understands, so this class I teach, there's usually around 50 students. We are actually oversubscribed, but it's usually about 80% females, 20% males. So it's interesting how that demographic is different. But when we get to the investing section, Jennifer, I usually ask a question, and it goes something kind of like this. I say, okay, everybody, if you had $100,000 to invest and you knew at the end of 1 year you would have $102,000, right? So you're going to get a 2% return, or you get $100,000, you might get $110,000 at the end of the year, but you might have $90,000 at the end of the year. For a show of hands, and guess which percentage in the classroom leans towards the guaranteed money? It's the females in the room, and these are 20 and 21-year-olds. And it's interesting because almost without exception, the guys in the class, they all go for they'll take 110 and they'll say, well, Professor Work, how can I get 120? And I'll even risk going down to 50 to get the 120. And so there's just that kind of like that thing that we're talking about. It's there, and that's why again we just want to encourage conversations and communication in life, so that whatever risk means to you and whatever all these things mean, it's informed.
Yeah, no, that's so. It's almost like there's a bravado. We've got to take the risk to get great reward, and women, we typically like comfort and stability and safety, and it doesn't mean that we won't take risk. We just want to know, we want to know the outcome. We want to understand things. We want to know the blind spots.
Exactly.
I am the same way. And my husband and I, we talk about that quite a bit. He's always like, "Oh, when this gets to this, I'm buying it." No, no, we are not. No, I don't think that we're doing that. Well, why not? And so we have this banter, but we look at things so different when it comes to that risk reward style.
Yeah, it's interesting because even I'll maybe just share even a blind spot that I have, because my wife and I talk about this stuff, and in a sense I was like for years in our marriage making an assumption she just wasn't that interested in it, right? Because when we would talk about it, I would do my version of talking about it, and it wasn't necessarily resonating with her. So then it's coming back to me is she's not that interested, but I always encourage people to have like that kind of, like look in the mirror, always evaluate yourself, be curious, intellectually curious. And then, when I actually started opening up the conversation, really starting to understand like what was it that she needed to hear? Like what were the things that were missing? And it's been interesting. It's still a work in progress. I can't claim I've achieved perfection on this one, but we have this open dialogue now, and it's like we try to set aside or overcome, maybe that's a better way to say it, our blind spots or even our biases as we were growing up. And let's just get to the table for that common benefit and come to some mutual agreement on things.
Yeah, we've talked about this in some of our previous Limitless webinars and in-person events, but we all have our own money story.
Yeah.
And, that was ingrained in us very early on. So when we are talking about this, and everyone learns differently,
Yeah.
it's one of the things that I love about sitting across the table from someone is you get to see body language and you get to see almost if they're uncomfortable or something, makes them squirm a little bit. Let's address this and let's talk about this. And one of the things that we put on here, not only talking about pay and maybe how to negotiate that, the investment gaps, but just being really transparent with your, trusted financial advisor.
Yes.
And we had a question that was submitted from a new graduate that said, "Hey, I'm just starting out. Do I really need a financial advisor to invest in the stock market?" And one of the things that I would say is, regardless of where you are in your career, in your journey with investing, what greater place to gain more knowledge of your goals, your objectives, your risk tolerance, what that time value of money looks like than meeting with a financial advisor. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to hire one to invest in the market. There are many different ways that you can do that, but at least allow them to step into that space with you and figure out what's important to you. Um, the other question that came from this individual, and by the way, this new graduate, congratulations. We are excited for you in this next journey, and I love that you're even asking these questions because I think that it's so far from most individuals that are starting their first, real adult job. And how do I invest, and what does that look like? I know for me it was how do I pay the student loan and not live on ramen noodles, for the next 10 years? Um, But savings in how do we, if we have savings and we don't want to invest in the market, we want that to be a little bit more secure. Do we just keep it in a checking account and really not earn anything? And I think that there are some really, really great savings vehicles out there, like money markets, that are still paying over 4%.
Yeah, and I would just make a real like a point on that because I share this with my students. I always tell them separate your savings from your checking or operating account, and then of course I go into have an emergency fund which you never touch, and then have a savings account for your other goals. So that's a really good place to get started.
Yes, absolutely. And before we wrap up, I just want to touch on one other thing. You mentioned investment and financial literacy knowledge. Not all of us are, blessed to be able to come and sit in your class and hear all these fun statistics and learn from you, like your students are. But there are so many incredible things that we're doing, here at Frontier. There are so many great podcasts that are out there. We send out a monthly newsletter for Limitless. And when we add the replay, we're going to add in some additional podcasts that are really just kind of basic financial literacy that you can join. So I think that, just taking a look at everything that we talked about today, they really do go hand in hand. And so we hope that the time that you've spent with us today, you feel a little bit more educated and you do feel more confident in making financial decisions and taking a look at, the longevity risk that us as women carry if there are career breaks. Now estate planning, legal preparedness, even if you have the documents, when were those reviewed, and what do they say? And then our pay and investment gap. So, David, anything that you want to add in the 4 minutes that we have left?
Well, first, I want to say thank you again to you, Jennifer, the whole Frontier team, and the limitless work that you're doing. I don't see that. I work with a lot of advisors. I don't see that across every advisory team. So thank you so much for doing it. I just want to leave the listeners with this idea of there are so many resources out there to support you, and there are people like myself, and I have a whole team of people, and we are an extension of, as you know this, Jennifer, of you and the team. So don't hesitate. If any of these blind spots, if it's just one and there's one thing within one, that's something to address. So I just encourage everyone to take action and reach out to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So for those that are still here with us, I have our QR code to join our Limitless community. If this is your first event, or if you're not signed up for the newsletter, if you don't mind scanning that, and me and I will get you added to our monthly newsletter, and then you'll be on the list to also receive all of the invites for our webinar and our in-person event. We know there are a lot of things that you can be doing over your lunch hour on a Thursday, and we are just so grateful that you chose to spend the time with us. David, we're so grateful for your partnership, for your insight, and really how you've helped navigate some of these blind spots. And I had no idea that started with Volvo. So we walked away with all sorts of fun little nuggets today.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank the audience, Jennifer. I mean, I wish that we could be in person, and I can't see anybody. So but thank you to the audience. Thank you for attending.
No. All right. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.